Well, good morning and welcome to another video. I thought I'd do this one today about a couple of my favourite lessons from A Course in Miracles. And if you haven't heard of A Course in Miracles, you can get that book from the Foundation for Inner Peace online. Just Google Foundation for Inner Peace or FIP. It'll probably come up for about 25 bucks. You can also get the white edition, which is in two parts, which I'll put the link to that in the website down below. And there are a couple of other versions of the old green version. People still tell me that they have. And I even met somebody recently that still had the original 3 volumes that it was first released in. This is the 3rd edition. Something just fell out. They're probably after more money. Yep. This is the 1st edition. Pay no attention to this original edit nonsense on the cover. It doesn't really matter. You may even have this one, which is the sparkly version. And I've even had somebody tell me they have a black version, which is funny because I saw a black version in a vision not long ago when I was involved in doing the white edition. So there's many different editions, but the workbook is the same in all of them, and the only difference I think being in any of them is really the content, in that originally there was about 50 or 60 pages edited out because it was deemed at that time in the mid 60s to mid 70s not appropriate, I guess, to a prude society. There was a little bit about homosexuality and other things like that in there. So anyway, that's all been put back in these days. So whatever version you have is great. It's the workbook that matters, and it's the workbook lessons that we're going to talk about today. The text is required to make sense of the lessons, like the lessons on by themselves. It says at the beginning of each section in the book, there's a little introduction. It says at the beginning of the workbook that you need not believe the lessons, you need not like them and all that sort of thing. Just do them, and then it's in the doing that you'll see that they're true. So if you don't want to spend $25 on a book or whatever they cost, you'll find them secondhand, no doubt, as well on eBay. But we can mail you one of these. This is the 20-minute book, and we also have it in this slightly extended version. Try and get the shine off it there. Which we produced recently for a younger mindset, to try and have an impact, I guess, or to extend the message to a mindset amongst the youth that see only hopelessness and suicide as a way out of their drama, and it's a very, very sad downward spiral, that path, and it's one that I know well from my own early beginnings with coming to terms with myself, which is what any of these books is all about. You are coming to terms with yourself, to realizing yourself through an experience of divine recognition, as well as being able to realize yourself in relationships with other people, the world, etc., and find that sense of oneness and belonging here, even on earth, as it is in eternity. It's not a religious path by any means. Most of the statement in this is very universal in its spiritual context, and you'll find probably 200 or 300 pages of it are in Shakespearean blank verse, which is almost like poetry. And then there's manual for teachers. There's a clarification for terms in this one, and supplements and everything like that. So I'm just going to focus today on workbook lesson number 10, which anyone who's done the course before and who's completed the workbook lesson, and it says very specifically in the course, you cannot call yourself a teacher of God until you have completed the workbook lessons. Now, there's no specific certification on a piece of paper or anything. You don't get any of that. Forget about it. It's something that you reconcile within yourself as a point of honesty and integrity and all of that sort of stuff. So if you jump online and somebody's offering you a certificate in mastery of something, or you know, it's not worth anything more than to wipe your ass with it. And the idea of that goes against even anything that this teaches, that you're already free. There's no piece of paper that can guarantee your freedom, and to hold a piece of paper and says, I'm a master of something, or actually denies the nature of your freedom. It's completely hypocritical, I think is the word. So lesson 10 then. Lesson 10 is one that has got me out of more tough spots mentally than probably any other lesson in the workbook. It's my thoughts do not mean anything. And many, many years ago, when I was, as I said myself, suicidal, I did wake up in hospital from a suicide attempt, which failed, thankfully. And a decade later, that whole mentality and mindset came around again and propelled me. This time, I had a bit of spiritual learning, but propelled me this time into the dark night of my soul, which brought about my awakening. And lesson 10, however, has been one of those constant companions in my journey that brings my mind back to a central place of peace, no matter what fears or angers, and I don't really have any of that stuff anymore these days, but no matter what disturbs my peace of mind, lesson 10, if practiced properly, just completely like brings the mind back to a central place and like, peace again. And then onward into the next moment. So I'm going to read lesson 10 out and make comment, I think, wherever, if I feel it's necessary. It's probably not necessary, but I like to blab on a bit. So we'll just see what happens. And then one of the other lessons that I like, I don't know if we'll do it on this video, I might do another one, is lesson 200. Above all else, I want the peace of God. So I think that's it. Oh, there is no peace except the peace of God. It's been a while. So lesson 10 today, my thoughts do not mean anything. Right? And I'm reading this from the Sparkly book, which should be no different to this book, etc. This idea, lesson 10, my thoughts do not mean anything. This idea applies to all the thoughts of which you are aware or become aware in the practice periods. All the thoughts, not just the ones that upset you, all the thoughts, right? The heading, my thoughts do not mean anything. He's not saying my bad thoughts do not mean anything. It's all the thoughts, right? You'll come to realize that even the tiniest little thought about something you like, cup of tea and a biscuit or whatever, is a distraction from inner peace and will lead you out of that thought into the next one that relates to all your other thoughts about cup of tea and biscuit and people and friends and wouldn't it be nice to catch up with so-and-so, and before you know it, whoop. You see what I mean? That's how the mind works. It's just like this spiraling out of control. And before you know it, this is gone, and it's just like, you're trying to balance shit. There's nothing more unstable than balance. Don't try to balance stuff. Just bring yourself back to the center, right? Balance is not a spiritual concept. No matter how many people, it's like yoga and kundalini and chakras means nothing, right? All that anything is on the spiritual path is a decision, is a choice, is a remembrance that you made a choice for inner peace, and the training of your mind then to maintain it once you find it through an action of self-forgiveness. Everything else will happen by itself. Your crown will open and all, you'll see lights, things will appear and disappear, and people will say things and whatever, and you'll say, wow, isn't that whatever it is? And, like this painting, that's how you should feel in your mind, in your heart, at rest, at peace, not concerned about what's opening and what's not opening and what position to hold my hands, mudras, and it happens naturally. All of that stuff happens naturally. You don't need any training for the physical nature of what follows from the mental application of the spiritual principles of a universal curriculum such as this. It's all automatic. Heal the mind, the rest will follow. You don't have to sit in a certain way when you meditate on. You don't have to hold your hands, nothing. Just sit comfortably. Right? It's not about talking in tongues. It makes no sense to talk in a language nobody understands. None of that. Forget it. All right. My thoughts do not mean anything, including all those thoughts I just told you. You see how it just... Focus, Dave. This idea applies to all the thoughts of which you are aware or become aware in the practice periods. The reason the idea is applicable to all of them, no matter what they're about, even your spiritual ones, it doesn't say that, is that they are not your real thoughts. We have made this distinction before and will again. Listen to this. You have no basis for comparison as yet. You don't know what your real thoughts are. That's what it's telling you there. You don't know what your real thoughts are. All you're aware of is just this constant blah, 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 blah that goes on in your mind 24/7, and you listen to it and you try to work out thoughts that you think are meaningful versus thoughts that you think are not meaningful. It's all a fucking parade of just mindless nothingness. You know, and the fact that you're dwelling on those thoughts mean you're not really thinking. Those thoughts are already over and gone before you bring them to your awareness. And they're ideas that are already in the past, and to dwell on them at all removes you from the nature of being present in the moment here and now. It's like there's a little guy down in the basement holding up a sign of something that you can think about or say, and you look at it and you go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'll say that. Well, he's already held it up. You've already read it. There's no need to say it. That part's already done. The thought is simply a distraction over, and I should add, it's not a distraction if you're not doing a spiritual discipline, if you're not pursuing purification of the mind. If you're not pursuing a purification of the mind, you're watching the wrong video and carry on as normal. But if you're chasing inner peace, all of those thoughts are merely a distraction over peace. It's like a veil or a blanket or a wall, it seems sometimes. You know, so you have no basis for comparison as yet. When you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. And you have to look at your thoughts, you know, look at the thoughts I have now, how I think they have meaning. These flowers, this picture, the chair I'm sitting in, I've given everything a meaning. What does it really mean? What's the meaning of life? If I don't know what the meaning of life is, how do I know what meaning to ascribe to all of these things and people and situations and relationships? It's just stuff that I make up as I go along based on thoughts in my head that I listen to, which actually can't tell me what I am or what the meaning of life is anyway. It's kind of crazy. When you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. This is the second time we've used this kind of idea. The form is only slightly different. This is a mind training. This time the idea is introduced with my thoughts instead of these thoughts, and no link is made overtly with the things around you. The emphasis is now on the lack of reality of what you think you think. This aspect of the correction process began with the idea that the thoughts of which you are aware are meaningless outside rather than within, and then stress their past, there you go, rather than their present status. Now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. Right? Can you see how that you are not thinking? Can you see how that actually happens? The thinking is done way back here in consciousness somewhere, and the shuffling and getting ready to hold up the signboard. And the thing that speaks out the thoughts is not the thing that thinks, it's the mouthpiece. The body is the mouthpiece. The mind is what comes up with these thoughts here. But all of these thoughts are meaningless because none of them have the ability to tell you the meaning of life. They're all substitutes. They're all verification for an idea of separation from true meaning or the meaning of life. An alternative, potential, possible meaning. And every time the rug's pulled out from under your feet for the meaning you've given everything and all the rules and regulations that you've placed which fail you in relationships and societies and everything else like that, everything tumbles. It's like a house of cards and you start to restack it again. Well, that thought didn't work. Let me try this thought. What about if we just add some armor here and some defenses there and some more rules over there? It's never going to work. You just got to give up. So the emphasis is now on the lack of reality of what you think you think. This aspect of the correction process began with the idea that the thoughts... Oh, we just read that bit. Now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. This is merely another way of repeating our earlier statement that your mind is really a blank. To recognize this is to recognize nothingness when you think you see it. As such, it is the prerequisite for vision. Now that's going to muck with your head. To recognize the nature of these thoughts that you think is to recognize nothingness. And yet your whole life has been structured around the thoughts you think. Now here he is telling you it's nothingness. Your whole life that's been based on this is nothing. It's like, I remember when I read that, it's like, oh, thank God. You know, there was the temptation there to become upset that my whole life so far up to the age of 33 had been nothing. But it was an experience that prepared me to understand that it was nothing. Can you hear that? 33 years of being prepared for a shock to the system that I would never recover from, and thankfully never recover from. To recognize this is to recognize nothingness when you think you see it. As such, it is the prerequisite for vision. And vision is something that's talked about heavily in the course, and the second half of the workbook dwells on the idea and of vision and brings it more to fruition in the idea that helps you to become able to understand it. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so as such, it is a prerequisite for vision. Right, now there's a little instruction section for the lesson. Every lesson has a few little instruction lines, and then there's the actual application of the lesson. Close your eyes for these exercises. You have to do exactly, right? You may not understand it, you may not like it, you may want to have actual resistance. Just do it. You bought the book, you spent $25. What's the point in doing that and not, you know, it's like you don't go to the doctor for something and he gives you a prescription, you go, nah, I won't take that. Close your eyes for these exercises and introduce them by repeating the idea for today quite slowly to yourself. My thoughts do not mean anything. Quite slowly. My thoughts do not mean anything. Right? You got to feel it. You got to mean it inside when you say that. Repeat it to yourself. Can I hear myself say that? My thoughts do not mean anything. So, then add, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. And you'll have no idea of how valuable that is until you actually apply it to your thinking. The exercises consist, as before, in searching your mind for all the thoughts which are available to you without selection or judgment, to try to avoid classification of any kind. Right? Remember, they're all meaningless, they're all pointless, they're all not your real thoughts. It's not like you have some not real thoughts that are more important than other not real thoughts. They're all a distraction. Little cup of tea thought. The exercises consist, as before, in searching your mind for all the thoughts which are available to you without selection or judgment. Try to avoid classification of any kind. In fact, if you find it helpful to do so, you might imagine that you are watching an oddly assorted procession going by, which has little, if any, personal meaning to you. Right? You become more of an observer of your thoughts in this idea, in this lesson. You're sort of stepping back and you're watching your thoughts. You're searching them out, and there they are. There's my thoughts, and look at them all going by. And, you know, if you've ever tried to watch, we have cane trains here that go twice a year for the harvest, and you often get stuck for 10, 15 minutes at a cane train crossing, and you try to focus on the center and all the carriages go by, but occasionally one will have some spray painting on it or something, and you'll get distracted. You'll give that one more meaning than all the rest. See what I mean? So try to avoid classification, blah, blah, blah. An oddly assorted procession going by which has little, if any, personal meaning to you. as each one crosses your mind, say, this thought about cane trains, or blank, it's actually this thought about blank, does not mean anything. That thought about blank does not mean anything. Right? And you do that for a couple of minutes. Where are we? Today's idea can obviously serve for any thought that distresses you at any time. In addition, 5 practice periods today are recommended, each involving no more than a minute or so. See how I make up things that aren't actually there? A minute or so of mind searching. It is not recommended that this time period be extended, and it should be reduced to half a minute or even less if you experience discomfort. Remember, however, to repeat the idea slowly before applying it specifically, and also to add, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. So you start the practice period by searching your mind for thoughts. If there's ones there that are obviously upsetting you straight away, use them. If they're just sort of meandering, a whole train of just meaningless thoughts going by, just whatever. All right? My thoughts do not mean anything. I start the lesson with that. My thoughts do not mean anything. This thought about a trainload of thoughts going by does not mean anything. This idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. And then you close your eyes, you go on to the next one. Or hopefully your eyes are closed. You go on to the next one. My thoughts do not mean anything. My thoughts about going on to the next thought do not mean anything. This thought will help to release me from all that I now believe. All right? Then on to the next one. My thoughts about flowers in a vase do not mean anything. All right? Etc. This thought will help to release me from all that I now believe. And you do that for about a minute or so. Personally, I've never experienced discomfort in relationship to doing these lessons. I've always found it very empowering and very liberating to actually sit down, especially this lesson. As I said before, it's one of my favorites, to sit down and do this lesson and apply it to things, specifically at any time during the day when something seems to upset me. And that's really not much these days, very little. So we'll leave it at that. I'll do lesson 200 next time. And all of these lessons work together. I was talking with someone the other day who's doing the workbook lessons at random, just opening it up wherever for the day, like an oracle, and just using it like that. I guess that's fine if you want to do that for a bit, but if you can take it on board and take it from me that these workbook lessons have been structured, the beginning of the book is to undo the way you see things now, and the second half of the workbook is to bring about the acquisition of vision or true sight, right? Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Singular vision. So in that sense, it is kind of important that that you be willing to follow the curriculum and take as much as you can at a given time. In the instructions in the beginning, don't do more than 1 lesson a day. You can sit on 1 lesson for more than 1 day if you feel good about it and you really want to, but don't go, I've met people say, I've done 10 lessons a day. I'll finish this course in a month and a half. That's not what it's about. It's a slowly evolving training program that you participate with to constantly and have a long standing involvement with, to be continually in the habit breaking, I guess, or reinterpreting defenses practice for an extended period so that it becomes set in you. Otherwise, it'll just be something you rush through and what's next? Now what do? This is about lasting change, and that's only going to happen through a deep and miraculous, which is what's a Course in Miracles and not a Course in, I've studied that, I know what it says. You have to have the miracle, and there is, you're entitled to it. It has to be a lasting change. There's no point in rushing through this, having an emotional release, finding a moment of peace, and then going back out into the world with the same mental patterns and processing that you've had all along, and getting stuck into it again. It's pointless. Follow the instructions, do the lessons, 1 lesson a day, not more than that. and you'll get the results of doing that. And it was explained to me that this book was channeled from the Christ mind through a woman in the United States in the 60s and 70s who, with her partner, dictated it all, took it all down, and produced the very first copy of A Course in Miracles, which was a Xeroxed book, which this was eventually taken from Edgar Casey. And they call it the Edgar Casey edit. But if anyone's interested in all that beginnings of the course, I mean, it's just more of a distraction, but there is some interesting stuff there. I mean, the connections, that higher, lower mind connections between Helen and Jesus, the stuff that you can read about that is just like mind-blowing. And personally, I love the bit where anyone who's ever seen the story of A Course in Miracles, and Helen's passed on during, this is a documentary about the course, and Glynis Johns, I think, was the woman who did her voiceover. She even gets the emotionality into the voiceover as if it was Helen, and it's like filled me with shock and surprise or something when suddenly the voice revealed itself as Jesus, And if you haven't met Jesus, haven't had an experience of meeting he who walks in sandals, then it's not going to mean much to you, but I have on several occasions, and I know many other people who have. So it's quite a mind-blowing concept and a mind-blowing idea to come to terms with the notion that there's a whole nother level of things going on beyond what we can see, hear, smell, touch and taste, that is attempting to get our attention. But we're just so distracted down here with Donald Trumps and coronaviruses and everything else. It's just like, look up. Oh yeah. Go out tonight and look up at the stars. Try to get a sense of how small you are and how much all your troubles and problems don't mean to the universe. All right, well, I'll put that link to the website down below, and I don't know where those other little ones, there they are. If you want a bunch of these, a handful of these that you can hand out, we don't have many of these left, but maybe only 100. And I've probably got about 600-700 of these left out of 10,000 that we originally got printed. So, on the website, there's a donation section. Go in and put $1,000 in there if you got it, and we'll get some more of these done, or $1. And this one, as far as I know, it's not available anymore, and I think I have about 20 of these left. And these are by donation. If it's an international order, I'll do reverse paid on the postage. So, yeah, but otherwise, just jump online, Foundation for Inner Peace, get this one, it'll do. That's the one, the actual book, it didn't have that star thing on the front. That's the one that I had when I had my awakening, and it didn't have all this stuff in it. It was just very basic back then, and it had all the edit taken out of it, But the mind training, the lessons, the workbook is of incredible and invaluable assistance to anyone who's interested in pursuing their own liberation from the cyclical nature of the bondage of time and space. And if you're not sure whether you're done with participating in time and space as it is, turn on the television set and just see what's going on in the world, and you'll be more inspired to make a more beneficial decision, I'm sure. Salvation is a true thing. You really are spirit and you're not flesh. There is no death. You're whole and perfect as God created you. Eternal, loved and loving. And the journey of the soul awaits you if you are ready to participate in it and play your part in the great adventure of salvation. All right, I love you. Take it easy.